My parents are taking me to court to take my heart and save my adoptive sister, Susana Hernández. The judge uses advanced technology to extract our memories, ensuring that only irrefutable evidence is presented. A jury of 12 people decides the verdict, strictly following the judicial protocol. If my parents win the case, my organs will belong to them. They think I won't dare to show up to the trial because they believe I'm evil. However, everyone is filled with tears when they see my memories and the truth of what happened. I approached the platform to be judged. On the big screen in front of me, comments were streaming in real time. She's the first person brave enough to face a trial. Criminals will only surrender to irrefutable evidence. The show is about to begin. Before we started, the judge gave me one last warning. Defendant, are you aware of the judicial process and do you understand its consequences? Are you sure you want to proceed? If found guilty in court, I will be euthanized on the spot, and ownership of my organs will pass to my parents. Then they can use my heart to save Susana Hernández. In the plaintiff's seats, my biological parents looked at me with disdain. They were so sure they would win this trial. I couldn't understand why. I was their biological daughter. But they had spent years tormenting me, hating me, and hurting me. Now they even wanted to rip my heart out. Many times I suspected that Susana was their real daughter, not me. At that moment, she was sitting beside them, wearing a mask and sunglasses that covered her face, so I couldn't see her expression. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, then looked at the judge with determination. Let's begin. The judge turned to the plaintiffs. Plaintiffs, are you aware that the trial... Before he could finish, my mother abruptly interrupted. We are your parents. How could we lose this case? Hurry up and get this over with. Susana doesn't have time to waste. And so the trial began. The first charge against the defendant was the failure to fulfill her family obligations, negligence towards her bedridden father, and the selfishness of indulging in a decadent lifestyle. On the screen, my mother was drying her tears while detailing the charges. Our family didn't have much money. My father worked tirelessly to pay for my school and university, but when he fell seriously ill, I was forced to drop out of my studies and work to cover medical and household expenses. I didn't send enough money for his medical bills, causing him to suffer a permanent disability in his left leg. How cruel. What an ungrateful brat. What a waste of education. The comments were brutal. The screen showed my mother still calling me, even bringing my disabled father to the house to look for me, all in vain. Even the judge frowned at that. On the plaintiff's side, my parents seemed arrogant. I saw Susana slightly raising her chin. I sat calmly in the defendant's chair as the staff quickly placed the memory extraction device on my head, the buzzing of electricity. I felt a sharp pain piercing my brain. I pressed my lips tightly, not making a sound. A few seconds later, 2 big words appeared on the screen. Not guilty. The screen was flooded with question marks from the audience. How could I be not guilty? My mother bowed her head in guilt. My memories were projected on the screen. When I was 8 years old, Susana came to live with us. She and I, along with her parents, had been in a car accident. Her parents died on the spot. Her father was my father's best friend, so my father didn't hesitate to adopt Susana into our family. My mother agreed immediately. She had always liked Susana. Since then, my life became hell. Anything Susana liked had to be given to her, even if it was my textbooks and homework. I didn't want to. The teacher will scold me, I protested. My father slapped me in the face. You just lost your parents. What's the problem with giving her a notebook? Before our final exams that year, Susana fell in love with all the pens I had. I refused to give them to her. My father grabbed a broom and hit me with it. You're a heartless and selfish girl. What's the problem with these pens? Give them to Susana. While crying in pain, my mother hugged Susana and consoled her while crying. It's okay, I'll buy you new ones. With red eyes, Susana said, but those pens look like the ones my mother gave me for my birthday. Trembling, I gave her my entire pencil case. Stop hitting me, I cried. Take it all. Just take it all. I don't want any. I didn't attend my exams that day. When I failed all my subjects in the final exams, they forced me to drop out of school. Anyway, you're too stupid for school, my father mocked, turning to Susana. Her eyes softened. Susana is different. She's always been at the top of her class. I was the one who was always at the top of my class. My parents always ignored how well I was doing in my studies. Soon, my mother got me a job at a factory, working hard to ensure I sent money home on time. She told me, Susana's tuition isn't cheap. Every word she spoke was about Susana. I ignored how pale she was from the pains of my first menstruation and the red stains on my pants. Working at the factory was exhausting, but the small library there contained damaged textbooks and discarded old books. I ran to the library during my breaks to read and study. Some factory workers were somewhat educated and, seeing that I was young and eager to learn, were happy to be my tutors. Some even tried to enroll me in a nearby high school. I sent most of my wages home, saving the rest, hoping to return to school someday. However, one day I got sick and fell behind on sending the money. My parents stormed into the factory, screaming and beating me. My coworkers tried to stop them. In the chaos, my books fell to the ground and the money I had hidden between the pages spilled out. My father kicked me in the stomach. "How dare you hide money from us? I won't kill you today, but this won't go unpunished." My mother tore the books to pieces. "You're studying, you're trash, but you still dream of school." I knelt on the floor begging my mother to stop. "Please, Mom, don't do this. They're not even my books." "I had to take them." My father slapped me. "How dare you answer? Your mother can do whatever she wants. You're wasting money on nonsense instead of using it where it matters." They destroyed my books, threw them in the water, and stomped on them. They searched my room, taking all my money. They left me with nothing. Before leaving, my mother growled, "If you have so much free time, get another job. Susana needs money for her extracurricular classes." I had nothing left. My parents, completely focused on Susana, never thought about how I would eat or dress without money. The books were completely destroyed. I couldn't return them, so I had to take part-time jobs to earn money and pay their value. One of the jobs was at a construction site, doing occasional tasks and manual labor. It was even more exhausting than the factory. Once I dropped a whole bucket of cement because it was too heavy and I was weakened by menstruation pains. The foreman shook his head upon seeing this and told me I shouldn't work there anymore. I knelt and begged through tears. "I can do better. Please give me another chance." The foreman sighed and tried to help me up, but the cement had dried quickly, trapping my foot. In the end, the workers had to use a hammer to break the concrete, injuring my foot in the process. Still, they fired me from the job, but the foreman gave me another $300 out of pity. He told me to go to the doctor for my injury and get some decent food to nourish my fragile body. I limped away. The money was hard-earned, and it was my birthday, so I wanted to treat myself. I went to a local pizzeria and ordered some pasta. Just then, my parents entered with Susana. They had taken her out to eat as usual, but didn't expect to see me there. My father was furious. "You hid money from us again, didn't you? You ungrateful brat." My mother lunged at me, pulling my hair while crying uncontrollably. "You're already a grown adult going out to eat while ignoring your parents' suffering." They were well-dressed. Susana even wore a puffy skirt with a bow, looking like a little princess. I was lying on the floor, with disheveled hair and wearing clothes that didn't fit me well, and that had seen better days. My shoes were worn out and soaked with blood from the wound on my feet. Still, I clenched my plate tightly, eating as quickly as I could. It was the best meal I had ever had. For a brief moment, I could forget all my pain. I saw Susana covering her nose, turning her head and showing disgust. Seeing this, my parents became even angrier. My mother grabbed my hand while my father tore the plate from my hands and poured it over my head. "Go ahead, eat until you're full." They left with Susana. Before leaving, my mother checked my pockets and took all the money I had. I sat there, watching as they pulled my hair, staring intently at their backs as they walked away. They looked like a family. The manager refused to take my money. They even tried to offer me another plate, but I shook my head and left the restaurant limping. It had started to rain outside. On the screen, my silhouette slowly disappeared into the rain. The online courtroom was silent. My parents moved subtly, avoiding the judge's gaze. Susana kept her head down, refusing to look at anyone. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as my memories continued to project on the screen. Suddenly, a muffled scream was heard from the back of the room. An older woman, with silver hair and a familiar face, made her way through the crowd. "Stop this! Stop this madness right now!" Her voice resonated with an authority that made everyone present turn to look at her. My heart skipped a beat. Although years had passed, I would recognize that voice anywhere. It was my maternal grandmother, whom I hadn't seen since I was 12. The last time I saw her, she was screaming and crying while my father kicked her out of the house, accusing her of trying to poison the family with her lies about how they treated their granddaughter. "Grandmother!" My voice came out as a trembling whisper. She advanced with firm steps, her eyes shining with a mix of pain and determination. "Yes, my child, I'm here." My mother turned pale like a ghost. "Mama, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" My grandmother's voice trembled with contained anger. "I came as soon as I heard about this macabre circus. How dare you, Maria? How dare you take your own daughter to court to take her heart?" She turned to the judge, her posture upright despite her age. "Your Honor, I am Elena Martinez, maternal grandmother of the defendant. For years, I tried to protect my granddaughter from the abuse she suffered in that house. I was a teacher for 40 years and I recognize abuse when I see it. I tried to report it, tried to take my granddaughter away, but her voice broke for a moment. They threatened to report me for attempted kidnapping if I approached her." The judge watched her with interest. "Mrs. Martinez, are you willing to testify under oath?" "Of course I am, and I have evidence." She pulled a thick envelope from her purse. "Letters my granddaughter wrote to me in secret for years, photographs of her injuries, medical reports I obtained from the times I took her to the emergency room until they prevented me from seeing her." Susana fidgeted uncomfortably in her seat. I saw her hand trembling as she clung to my mother's arm. The judge ordered a 15-minute recess to review the new evidence. As the officers escorted my grandmother to the stand, she stopped beside me, her eyes filled with tears as she looked closely at me. "My little one." She extended her wrinkled hand toward my face but stopped halfway, as if fearing I would reject her. "Forgive me. Forgive me for not fighting harder, for not finding a way to save you." I couldn't hold back the tears. After so many years of loneliness, feeling like no one in the world truly cared about me, seeing my grandmother there, with all that evidence stored, with all that love, it was more than I could bear. On the courtroom screen, the comments began to change. Wait, was someone trying to help her all this time? Grandmother kept all the evidence, and for years. This changes everything. My parents exchanged nervous glances. For the first time since the trial began, I saw real fear in their eyes. Susana sank further into her seat, as if she wanted to disappear. The trial was about to take an unexpected turn. When the trial resumed, the atmosphere in the courtroom was completely different. My grandmother sat on the stand, and the memory extraction device was placed on her head. Her memories began to project on the giant screen. The first image showed a young girl, me at 10 years old, arriving at her home in the middle of the night, trembling and with bruises on her arms. It was after they adopted Susana, my grandmother explained, her voice firm despite the obvious pain. My granddaughter appeared at my door, barefoot and scared. She told me her parents had kicked her out because Susana wanted her room. The comments on the screen exploded. They kicked her out of her own home? At 10 years old? That's attempted homicide. Where were the social services? My mother stood up abruptly. "She's lying. We never kicked her out. She ran away." The judge banged his gavel. "Madam, sit down, or you will be expelled from the courtroom." The memories continued to flow. I saw myself, year after year, seeking refuge at my grandmother's house. She documented every visit, photographed every injury, kept every note I wrote asking for help. I tried to report it. My grandmother continued, tears rolling down her cheeks. But they always had an explanation. They said I was interfering, that I was jealous because they preferred Susana. When I threatened to take the case to justice, they used their connections to keep me away. Suddenly, Susana stood up, staggering. I can't take this anymore." All eyes turned to her as she removed her sunglasses and mask. Her face was marked by tears and guilt. I knew what was happening," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I knew they were hurting her because of me, but I was so afraid of being alone again. When I lost my parents, I promised myself I would do anything to keep my new home, even if it meant—" She stopped, choked by sobs. "Even if it meant destroying someone else." The comments online erupted again. "The mask falls. Did she know all this time? She's as guilty as the parents." The judge leaned forward. "Miss Hernandez, are you confessing that you fabricated a false medical need for this trial?" Susana nodded, trembling. "Yes, I falsified the medical documents. The parents, they didn't know. I made them believe I was dying because I knew they would do anything for me. They've always done so." My mother collapsed into her seat, color draining from her face. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in an instant. The device on my grandmother's head kept working, showing more and more evidence of years of systematic abuse. But I could barely pay attention. My mind was fixed on Susana, on her confession. All those years, all the pain, all the suffering, and it had all been because of a scared little girl who never grew up. The comments kept coming. "This is sick. How many lives did this family destroy? Grandmother is the only one who tried to do something." The judge ordered another recess, this time for the prosecutors to evaluate additional charges for falsifying medical documents and perjury. As the officers escorted Susana out of the courtroom, she stopped in front of me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes red and swollen. "I know it means nothing now, but I'm so sorry." I couldn't respond. What do you say to someone who destroyed your life out of fear of losing theirs? My grandmother approached and wrapped her arms around me, protecting me as she had tried to do all those years ago. This time, no one stopped her. When the trial resumed, the prosecutor stood up with a new set of documents in his hands. His expression was grave as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution requests to file additional charges against the defendants. Fraud for falsifying medical documents, embezzlement of funds, documented systematic child abuse, and obstruction of justice for preventing previous abuse investigations." My parents sank into their seats. Susana visibly trembled. "Furthermore," the prosecutor continued, "we request an immediate protection order for the defendant and her grandmother against all the accused." The judge nodded gravely. "Granted." Now, regarding the original case, he turned to me directly. "This court finds the plaintiff's claims about their rights over the defendant's organs absolutely unfounded. Moreover, it finds this attempt particularly atrocious, given the history of abuse revealed." The comments began to appear again. "Justice? Finally, someone stops them. Grandmother is a heroine. Regarding the criminal charges, the judge continued, this court orders the immediate detention of the accused while the formal charges are processed. My mother began to cry hysterically. No, they can't do this to us. We're your parents. My father seemed to have aged decades in a matter of hours. Maria, he said softly to my mother, it's enough. It's time to face what we did. Susana stood up before the officers could reach her. I will go voluntarily, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I've been running from the truth for too long. As they escorted her out of the courtroom, Susana paused briefly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said without looking at me, but I want you to know that every word of your testimony that day was like a knife in my conscience. I will live with that pain for the rest of my life. The officers continued to take them away as the judge kept speaking. This court grants temporary legal custody of the defendant to her grandmother, Elena Martinez, pending the final resolution of criminal proceedings. My grandmother hugged me tightly, her tears mixing with mine. Additionally, the judge continued, an exhaustive investigation of the accused's financial assets is ordered to determine the extent of the fraud and establish appropriate restitution. The comments kept coming. Justice exists. Grandmother never gave up. This family is going to pay for everything they did. As I watched the people I once called family being taken away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Not for them, but for the girl I was, for all those lost years, for all the what-ifs that would never be. My grandmother seemed to read my thoughts. My child, she whispered, we can't change the past, but we can build a future, together. The judge gave one last bang with his gavel. The session is adjourned. The criminal proceedings will begin in a week. Miss, he addressed me directly, this court deeply regrets that it had to come to these extremes to obtain justice. Your bravery today has not only freed you, but has exposed a case of abuse that needed to be stopped. We left the courtroom, my grandmother holding my hand as she did when I was little. The sun was shining outside, and for the first time in many years, I felt I could truly breathe freely. 6 months have passed since that day in court. Sometimes, when I wake up at my grandmother's house, I still find it hard to believe how much everything has changed. The criminal process was swift and decisive. The evidence was overwhelming. Decades of meticulously kept records by my grandmother, testimonies from neighbors and factory workers, bank records showing the systematic diversion of my money. My parents were sentenced to 8 years in prison for child abuse, fraud, and embezzlement. Susana received a lighter sentence, 3 years, with the possibility of parole after 1, for her role in falsifying medical documents and complicity in the abuse. During the trial, it was revealed that she had been in therapy for years, dealing with the trauma of losing her parents and the guilt for her role in my suffering. The comments on social media kept coming for weeks. Justice is delayed, but it arrives. This story opened our eyes about family abuse. Grandmother is an example that you should never give up. My grandmother, my silent heroine, transformed her old guest room into my sanctuary. This time, she told me while we painted the walls together, no one will take your space. It turned out she had kept more than just evidence. In a box in her attic, I found all my school notebooks from childhood, photos of me she had managed to save. Even the little teddy bear I thought was lost forever. I knew you would come back someday, she told me, her eyes shining with contained tears. I saved every little piece of you that I could. The financial investigation revealed that my parents had accumulated a significant amount of money over the years, all from my work and effort. The court ordered all of it to be returned to me, with interest. My grandmother insisted that I use it to resume my studies. You were always brilliant, she said. Now it's your time to shine. I enrolled in the local university, studying law. I want to help others who have gone through similar situations. In the afternoons, I volunteer at an organization that helps children victims of family abuse. Every time I see a child regain their smile, I feel a part of my own wound heal. A week ago, I received a letter from Susana from prison. I kept it unopened for days, unsure if I wanted to read her words. Finally, my grandmother sat with me as I opened it. Dear sister, the letter began. I don't deserve to call you that, I know. But I want you to know that therapy has helped me understand the monster I became. I don't seek your forgiveness. I just want you to know that your testimony that day changed something in me. For the first time, I saw the true extent of the damage I caused. I'm working to be a better person, even though I know I can never undo the past. The comments online about our case eventually turned into a broader move. Family justice goes viral. Thousands share their stories of abuse and survival. The story that changed the conversation about domestic abuse. My grandmother and I established a foundation with part of the recovered money. We called it Brave Heart, in honor of all the children who, like me, have to find the strength to survive the abuse of those who should love them. Last night, while we dined in my grandmother's small garden, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I am not afraid. I don't have to hide. I don't have to pretend. I don't have to survive. Now, finally, I can live. My grandmother watched me from the other side of the table, her eyes full of love and pride. "What are you thinking about, my child?" I smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. That some hearts don't need to be transplanted, Grandma. They just need to be freed. The final comments on the courtroom screen, now part of the historical records of the case, say, "This story is not just about justice, it's about hope. A reminder that it's never too late to do the right thing. A grandmother's true love changed everything." And so, with each new dawn, I write a new chapter of my life. I'm no longer the scared girl I once was. I'm a survivor, a student, an advocate, a beloved granddaughter. I'm free. And my heart, this heart they tried to claim as theirs, beats stronger than ever, full of hope and purpose. Because now I know that the real transplant I needed wasn't physical. It was the transplant of love, security, and justice that my grandmother always knew I deserved.